Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's panel session. I'm joined by some great panelists. Not all of them yet, actually. We're having some internet troubles with Israel, but we have very briefly David from MTIP, Cameron from Octopus Ventures, Joseph from Assobi's Partners, Michal, who's the one who will hopefully join us shortly from Tri Ventures, and last but not least, Patrick from Industry Fonden. Earlier this year, McKinsey said that as a result of COVID-19, that digital had vaulted 5 years in as little as 8 weeks. And I'm sure that's going to have a massive impact also on digital health and medtech generally. And the panel here today are to share some of their personal views and experience in this space. We hope that you'll post some questions and that these can be dealt with and answered towards the end of the session. We've got a number of items for the agenda, but we're going to kick off with some personal views of the key trends in health tech, including the impact of the current COVID-19 pandemic, and some personal views on the technology and the commercial drivers in this space, what opportunities there are, and perhaps the future challenges. Can I ask David, would you like to go first, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thanks, Peter, and thanks for having me today. It's a real honor to represent MTIP here on this opening debate of the conference. You know, there are many key trends that one can distinguish in the health tech sector, but I would like to just focus on 4 key trends. The first one is a decentralization of care. The second one is personalized medicine or personalized care. The third one would be value-based care, and the fourth one, preventative medicine. And those are key trends that are enabled by new technologies, by Internet of Medical Things. And in view of the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that we see, we believe that the decentralization of care is the one that is mostly the trend that is actually mostly accelerated right now. I mean, you don't want to bring the patients anymore to the hospital. You don't want to bring them necessarily to the clinic. So if they can be treated, diagnosed, or some kind of prevention at home or where they live and not at the center of care, like in the old days, that's for me a big paradigm shift right now.
Excellent. Michal, welcome.
Sorry for the trouble here. Sometimes technology is not on our favor.
So much for digital innovation, I say. Michal, we did introduce you while you were absent, but we were just opening up with sort of key views on key trends in health tech and your personal views on technology and the various drivers and opportunities. Can I ask you to jump straight in now that you've arrived?
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you very much for the opportunity of having me here. I think that 2020 is a tipping point year for digital health. We've seen a massive drive of this sector in the past several months. And I think that if digital health at the end of 2019 was planned and projected to increase by 5-fold in the next 5 years, we've seen it faster than ever before. 4,000% increase in telemedicine, from 11% in the United States to over 50% now, with 80 new codes that CMS actually pays today for telemedicine as if it was a personal face-to-face meeting, and 90% satisfaction. All this leads to 12 different IPOs in the past year. Companies like Livongo that went out a year ago with $3 billion evaluation got to 14, Peloton was 5, got to 22. I think what we've seen here is not just new people, tech, retail, insurance coming in, but we see digital health that are building this business, and those unicorns will have to go shopping. And I think this will drive the business. I think that there's a lot of excitement in digital health, and on the telemedicine platforms, we will see more and more convergence of technologies coming from entertainment, engagement, personalized medicine, prevention, all driven by data that will come and support this industry.
Excellent, thank you. Cameron, can I ask you to jump in now?
Yeah, I think the the point's already been very well made around the slightly unique circumstances we find ourselves in this year, and as a result, the enormous tailwinds and the drive towards digitalization that the current health pandemic has given almost the entire health tech sector. Just kind of pulling out one of the points I know David touched on, but I'm personally also particularly excited around on that personalization piece. And so, with the benefit that drive towards digitalization that will happening, I think the other key thing that we're interested in is we're increasingly getting a better understanding of how different people respond differently to the same drug, food, whatever it is. And so as that knowledge becomes more and more commonplace and that move towards digitalization also happens, looking at areas within health where there's been very little innovation over the past 10, 20, 30, 40 years, that kind of perfect storm of personalization of healthcare along with that drive towards digitalization is an area that we in particular are very excited about and starting to look at a number of opportunities within.
Yeah, excellent. Joseph.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Yeah, the Service Partners, we've been looking at the opportunities around healthcare in digital health. And one of the areas, apart from everything that has been said, has to do a lot with a trend which is unsustained. And it came from way back the last years, unsustainable healthcare system that without technology and without new ways of addressing the challenges of providing and supplying healthcare services is going to be perfectly boosting digital activities towards healthcare, basically to gain efficiency. If we look at how much money is the patient now willing to spend because the healthcare supply services by the governments or insurance companies cannot provide the pure coverage because of chronic conditions and aging population, more than 4% in the last 7 years has been annually growing the out-of-patient expenditure. So this consumerization, this demand by the public that now have a mobile in their hand and technologies that can bring healthcare solutions, for us, it's clearly a boost in the way that the market is going to demand and how this is going to put pressure on regulatory agency and reimbursement systems and payment systems, because you have to give way to this demand and this willingness to pay by the public, because there's no way we can fund this healthcare expenditure going forward without technology and without digital solutions in healthcare.
Yeah, thank you. It's good points there. Patrick.
Very good. So also from my side, thanks very much for the invitation to this panel. And on top of all the clever comments from my panelists here, I mean, we've been backing health tech companies since 10 years by now in Northern Europe primarily. And I think we are absolutely in a pivotal time. As you, Cameron, said, I mean, it's very unusual circumstances, but I think the Teladoc-Livongo merger, or announced merger, we should say, really is a pivotal time when we will see more at-scale type of companies, and also where these at-scale health tech companies, particularly in the US, will be looking for deeper solutions. So I think what I see on top of what has already been mentioned is really, I mean, the convergence between software, hardware, and biotech or chemistry, if you will. And I think we've been backing some companies that are in this very space, connected device type of solutions, but also the aim to really drive outcomes. And with that, we are particularly curious and interested in digital therapeutic applications. And I think that will absolutely be an overarching next wave beyond, I guess, the telemedicine remote care models that have been rolled out locally and soon now regionally and globally. On top, they will be building much more of depth with applied AI, deep AI to solve for health problems. And with that, I think we will have a big wave of digital therapeutic products and entering the market. And that will come with a number of challenges from a payer and regulatory environment. I'm sure we'll come back to that.
Thank you. To what extent do the panelists see, the traditional big pharma embracing digital innovation and working and collaborating with the tech startups, or is it being driven by the tech startups trying to get into the pharma pipeline?
So I may continue there. I've been in the pharma industry myself for almost 10 years. I mean, I think some of them are absolutely investing their way in. So they are learning with startups in their investment arms or in close adjacency. And others are hiring a digital officer who will try and basically pivot the business model of pharma. But I would say these are slow-moving companies. They are huge. They have big margins. This comes on top. But I think the acuteness and also the competitiveness in this space, and I think Roche's acquisition of Flatiron, for instance, is a big sign of this. All of them are in need of patient-reported data, health system data. So overarching is the hunt for data to better back their own medicines when they get regulatory and payer approvals. But I would say they have still a long way to go, and they are trying themselves out in various ways.
Yeah. Does anybody want to add to that? No? In which case, let's move on to our next subject, which is very much more personal, of course, and depending upon your company's investment profile. But what areas of digital health are most exciting to you, and why? Cameron, could you go first on this one?
Yeah. Just before we jump into the question, one other point that I'd add to the kind of favorable macro factors around digital health, which we've mainly covered in that first point. I think the only one that we haven't mentioned is around the increasingly favorable regulatory environment as well. So kind of going back to that point about that perfect storm of the macro drivers behind the kind of booming digital health space. Specifically within digital health, an area that is particularly interest to us and has been over the last couple of years has been around areas that we consider taboo subjects within health. And these are kind of topics that are so emotive, so personal, that a digital health solution, whether it's online coaching, cognitive behavioral therapy, digital therapeutics that Patrick alluded to, but essentially a solution that users are able to truly kind of and honestly engage with, has the ability to unlock a huge amount of latent demand. And that makes us really excited. And so these taboo areas, rightly or wrongly considered taboo by society, for us covers mental health, sexual health, addiction, and more recently been looking closely at fertility and menopause. So all these areas that are increasingly able to be serviced through digital offerings, and in their own right are all absolutely massive markets. But going back to the point I made in the last question, haven't necessarily changed fundamentally for years and decades. We see it as a really exciting opportunity for digital health to increase both accessibility and affordability in areas within health that are deeply emotive and personal to so many.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just pick up on one point? You're probably opening up the regulatory framework, and certainly, I work with many clients who use AI, and their experience is perhaps the opposite. The regulatory framework is not yet ready for AI, particularly if it's involved in decisions, clinical decisions, drug titration, and so on. Does anybody else have that experience as well? Companies that are in AI worry about how they're going to get regulated as medical devices for software.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with that one.
I think.
Go on, Michal.
Go on, Michal.
No, go ahead. It's okay.
Okay, maybe I'll jump in. I'll jump in first, and you can correct everything I say. I would say that I think you're totally right, Peter. I think within certain applications, and AI is a key one. Kind of, it feels like the regulatory environment is playing catch up in many ways, and I think for that reason, there's going to be an increasing role of whether it's the pharma partners, whether it's kind of the corporate environment to play quite an important role in kind of being that first level of filtration almost, because I think it probably will take a while for the regulatory environment to catch up.
Yeah. Sorry, Michal.
Yeah. I wanted to add that I think that AI is a big word, and it's a big buzzword. When we scrape a little bit under the surface, we see a lot of those algorithms are not truly AI, artificial intelligence, or machine learning, but there are smart algorithms. And I think that, if we put the buzzwords aside, I think that nor the regulatory bodies nor the doctors in the healthcare system really appreciates a black box. Okay, people want to know when they click on a button, they want to understand what is behind it. And what we've seen more and more is that companies that enables that visibility, even for decision support, gets much more traction both on regulatory side as well as the medical community. And I think it makes a lot of sense. We see many companies that for regulatory reasons, they are cataloging themselves as decision support, rather than really telling the doctor what to do, but advising, because the regulatory burden on that kind of technologies and the ability to show what is behind the algorithm is what both sides are interested in.
Yeah, if I just may, Peter, I completely agree with that. And the problem is that, you know, still a lot of doctors or caregivers don't want to be told by an algorithm what is the decision or what is the diagnosis, right? So there is the problem. They accept some kind of decision support. And the problem is that, you know, algorithms, complex algorithms with a lot of machine learning or self-learning elements in it, they can only, you know, they can do so much more than 10 human brains together. So the computing power, the sheer computing power is so much higher that for a person, I mean, they can compare so much data points at the same time that they have a better view on our predictability instead of what a human brain can do. And therefore, it's still very difficult. There is this tension between the doctors and that algorithm. And I think we have to first have a massive adoption of clinical decision support in the coming, you know, years, and only then we will go to more diagnostics.
Thank you. Let's take it back to the question, areas of digital health most exciting to you. Joseph, can I ask you to elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, sure. I would basically focus on the fact that I've been in the business of investing in biotech and medtech for the last 15 years. And before that, I was in pharma. So, and a whole Assavis thing is precisely has this background. So for Assavis and for some of the investors that come from probably the healthcare, pure biotech pharma world, we are precisely in areas that we can evaluate and we can perceive and contribute value to the offering of certain companies in the area of therapies and ways to bring to patients augmented capacities by the current existing drugs or just therapies that can be provided directly by the technology. So our area, one area of excitement for us, it's not about only knowledge and accumulated, let's say, background in areas that have to do with pharma, clinical trials, etc., which, by the way, is causing a verge of alliances and joint ventures. Click Therapeutics and Boehringer Ingelheim announced this week, or many other deals that are coming up every week by the pharma industry. We have a company like Caracare in our portfolio with a very nice European deal with Sanofi. We have other companies that are now negotiating deals with pharma. So everything that has to do with therapies that can be contributing to the healthcare systems in providing solutions to patients as any other druggable solution. In this case, it's not chemistry, it's not biology, it's technology. For us, is exciting, but we need to see that there's clinical efficacy, eventually safety, and we are focusing precisely on that. Everything else for us, just because it's where we come from, and just because the M&A is still to be set, and the jury is out for some of the monitoring and some of the diagnostic tools that are in the market, for us, it's not so attractive. So I would focus on digital therapeutics, which is actually what we are seeing most of the time in our deal flow.
So this is a sort of a prescription, if you like, of a digital therapeutic and a drug therapeutic you're talking about. Yeah, augmented therapies, things that go sit alongside with the drug, devices or technologies that software as a medical device, class 2A type of things that really provide patients with solutions, or physicians with options apart from drugs, and can be replacing drugs. We have a company in our portfolio, another one, which is Sios, which is doing mental health. And it's in some countries already, before giving you a pill for your anxiety, they are prescribing hours of virtual reality before they prescribe the drug, or as a coadjuvant. So this is exactly the sweet spot in which we are focused. Thank you. Mikhail, back to you.
Sure. So, I think that if we're looking at verticals, and remember, we at TriVentures, we're not doing biotech, we're not doing pharma. So our world is mostly in digital health and in medical devices. And within this digital health, we're looking verticals like was mentioned here. Mental health, I think, is a very big one that we have seen already companies that are moving along, but COVID will generate a lot of anxiety, a lot of instability that people have to somehow deal with. I think this is going to be a big sector, as well as sectors that will provide more and more services to the elderly care, longevity at home, services at home to the third generation, that I think are more ripe than ever before to get some of their services on Zoom or on other virtual platforms. And on top of that, I think that we're very excited about convergence in areas that we could see workflow efficiencies. Areas like the convergence between healthcare, fintech, and insurtech is one area, at least in the United States, that a lot of technology could make a big impact. The system is broken and people are losing their homes for being able to pay their debt. And I think that this is an area that we'll see more and more technologies in.
Thank you. Patrick, I've had a senior moment. I don't think you've answered this, have you yet?
Okay, happy to.
I haven't had a senior moment. I was right.
On top of all the good comments here, I think we're looking upon this. I like, Joseph, your comment there. I mean, we're looking upon this at health technologies entering into market. They don't only have to have promises. And I think they had a lot of promises, if you look backwards in time now, 5-10 years. And some of them were definitely not fulfilled. So we still have certain health systems and certain users that did not see the fulfillment of the promise. So we are dedicated to find teams and products that actually can solve unmet needs. And we're agnostic to vertical, but I agree. I think I did my PhD in central nervous systems disorders. There is a big unmet need because chemistry has failed in many of those, or still not filled the need at least. So, and we want the products to credibly show that they do solve the problem. So we are also pushing and helping and supporting our portfolio companies that we invest in to cleverly develop evidence. And that evidence will be the power for the teams when they roll out and try and scale these products. Without that, I think they will fall back on some of the pitfalls that we have seen in health tech in the past 5-10 years, that where companies only went with promises but without facts. So we are coming back to that aspect, and we're curiously looking at how actually teams and products are planning to go to launch and go beyond launch and scale.
Yeah. Well, that I think brings me nicely on to the next subject about how do you get adoption, how do you grow? And we talked about, I'll confess to the audience, we did prepare for this. And part of the preparations, we talked about some of the difficulties of launching into different markets, where who are the early adopters, who have regulatory pathway issues. Joseph, can I just ask you to just talk about your personal experience and understanding of some of the challenges between perhaps the US and Europe and even the rest of the world, or any hotspots where you see there are particular difficulties with adoption and reimbursement and monetization for these technologies?
Yeah, what we're facing, I mean, we have one of our companies is actually based in, as I mentioned before, Caracal is based in Germany. Probably one of the most advanced, if you wish, or at least on paper, of having a regulation that has to do with reimbursement, a public one, right? The Digital Healthcare Act in Germany is really posing a new trend. Many governments are watching it. The Catalan healthcare government is taking a look at this. Spain, France, other countries, I'm sure. And you probably, Patrick, David, and the rest of the colleagues here in the call, I'm sure they have already interactions with governments that are taking a look at something that is complex, something that is not clear how sustainable it is. And for me, the biggest challenge in Europe and in the US is this reasonability of the justification of the adoption by the governments of these technologies, and being able to show that digital health can provide healthcare economic savings to governments, which go beyond the expenditure of drugs that, as you know, in Europe is separated from the healthcare services. Insurance companies don't cover drugs. while in the US they do. But in the case, when you have to separate payers for drugs and healthcare services, and then if you add another layer, which is very relevant, which is social costs that have to do with elderly people that are not necessarily spending only drugs and healthcare services, but also social services like elderly homes, etc. If all these three layers are not connected in terms of reimbursement, you have a hard time as a company to show and bring the evidence that your healthcare economics is going to provide savings to the whole healthcare system, not only saving drugs, not only avoiding complications in hospitals, not only avoiding people getting into a more serious condition, but also other indirect savings. So the big challenge of these new trends in adoption is going to be, how do you justify in a holistic way from a health and social care system, which is the big expenditure of our current society, how do you show that? And actually the German experience is going to be very interesting, as you know, coming into place now. First companies are applying now to get this reimbursement, which is 3 months, you present everything, and then 12 months with an extension. Let's see how this initiative plays out and how sustainable it's in the future. Let's see what the insurance and payers are going to do, and employers in the US are going to deal with this justification. They are now facing also that. But everything for us, and as I said before, because our switch for this clinical evidence, now we have to show clinical evidence, of course. Randomized control trials is going to be the name of the game in most of the cases, and you have to show it and prove it, but also you have to add your Excel spreadsheet with the savings. So be ready for that. Lots of digital health, great technologies. Okay, engineers are very important, but health economics is going to be crucial, and clinical, obviously, but that's obviously underlying, and that's a basic. But health economics, let's look at that seriously.
I mean, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, and certainly not Mr. Divulge or embarrass any particular company. But is there a concrete example someone can give us as to example of where these issues come to the head, come to be considered?
I mean, I can start off and maybe also mention a bit of my background. I spent some 10, 15 years in the market access field, and also from a research perspective, to your point, Josep, on health economics. And I think the systems from a payer perspective are really not doing it. They are slow. They are not nimble enough to adopt to new health tech products. Now, on the flip side, the health tech companies are also struggling to get this fixed. And we have, for instance, one company in a connected device and wrapped in software company in respiratory disease called Nuvoair. And they have a really novel digital therapeutic approach to how to solve for a lot of aspects around severe respiratory disease. Now, the systems aren't rigged to allow for adoption of these type of products. We're just now looking at the US with coding system for reimbursement that is basically 10 years old. And if you want to get a new code in place to allow for precise reimbursement for such a product, it takes five years plus. So you need to be nimble and see how you can actually adjust your commercial model to launch in certain markets, or be part of some other broader coding. So I think there are devils in the details here of how the payer systems are rigged, which are not at all adopted for health tech or software type of products. But equally, Joseph, to your point, I think we put the challenge out there for all our portfolio companies that we invest in, that they need to provide the facts and evidence, because that will ultimately be what regulators and payers will demand to allow for reimbursing at a greater scale. But as a consequence, I think we see a lot of companies struggling and pivoting in the commercial models. So for us, we are focusing a lot on provider and pharma-facing technologies in health tech. And you see them moving with two business models, one facing pharma, one facing providers, because it will take longer time for providers to adopt and reimbursements to tick in. And some early countries may be first adopters, but still to get at scale with a reimbursed product model, that is a big effort. But I would say everybody in our portfolio are up to the challenge and trying to see how they nimbly can approach various markets and prioritize.
But we're starting to get some questions in, and I think one of the ones that's come up there first, I hope you can all see that, is would be interesting to hear, this is from Sophia Svensson hear what the panel thinks about the business models and pricing in relation to digital therapeutics. Joseph, do you have a view on that?
Well, I think there's a global trend. I was reading a report the other day that all this bundling and value-based healthcare payment systems, which have been on the table for many years for pharma and for innovative companies, it's not so much now on the agenda. I think fee-for-service, subscription models, in which the government is justifying, a payment, like let's say the German experience that we have. The plan is just basically to all the subscribers that qualify, you just have to show that you are a medical device, a software as a service compliant, and then you get a fee per user, because the underlying economics is very clear. That's why you build a whole market access type of justification, right? This is what I'm saying now. It's a fee for service / pay per user, or some sort of coverage per patient that it's joining the technology.
Yeah. I've got another good question here as I scroll down, and I'm going to invite someone to jump in, hopefully, and they'll pick up the mantle here. Within the therapy space, this is from Andrew Cameron, within the therapy space, is there a difference in investor appetite between pure digital solutions versus digital solutions combined with a device? For example, devices involved in the collection of data related to the digital solution. Does anyone have a view on that?
My comment would be, for us, we have invested in connected devices, and we like the convergence between hardware, software, and even chemistry. So we would have an appetite for that, and we have portfolio companies, for instance, Nuvair that I mentioned before. But I do see a divided camp here, where generalist tech investors would typically stay out of any hardware component, and whereas more life science-oriented investors may take an appetite in that, particularly those who have comfort in investing in med devices, for instance, or diagnostics, apart from therapeutics. So I think you probably need to really get to know the various investors in terms of both comfort and how they can support you, Andrew, potentially with your company. So I would urge you to really look into what are these investors up to, what are their competencies, and have they done this before? That probably will lead you to the right ones.
So it's not just the technology.
And maybe one more comment on that, if I may. I think that we at TriVentures, we're also doing both. We are doing data-driven with devices, without devices. If the connected device is more medical versus consumer. I think that bringing in a consumer device that collects data in the wellness and fitness area is much, much harder because the competition is super high. Whereas if you bring a true medical device that instead of going to your doctor, you can do now at home, and we have one of those, we have a connected device that treats essential tremor. So instead of going and doing a brain surgery, for example, you put a watch that neurostimulates your periphery nerve and gets a similar effect. That makes a very, very compelling story to patients. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Certainly in my experience as a patent attorney, I've seen investors thinking they're investing in a medical device and say, no, the innovation is all in the software, sorry.
Yeah.
But it does sound like the technologies are converging. Maybe some of the investors need to converge as well. I'm going to move on, and I'm now going to abuse my position as chair or moderator, and we're going to talk about intellectual property. David, you offered to give us some insights as to where does IP feature in your IP due diligence? What are you looking for in terms of what's presented to you? And do you feel generally that health tech companies are investor ready in terms of their position on their IP and ability to articulate it and what it's doing for their business?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Peter. First of all, I have to say that a lot of companies that are raising later rounds don't emphasize so much their IP anymore. There is what I don't see often is in the investor decks an IP strategy explained. Or no, I mean it might sound boring, but in the end, it's
my job. Don't say that.
Yeah, well, it is still the core of the technology. And I want to see and understand what is the IP strategy, how they have built their IP stack as a company. And there are different types of IP. There are copyrights, there are patents, there are trademarks, there are trade secrets. And I think a company should really have thought about each individual element and have a strategy. I don't say that you need an IP attorney because, you know, to be honest, the lawyers just want to draft additional agreements on every single aspect, but you really have to think through where it's worth to have an IP protection or have an IP strategy. And if we look at maybe the first thing is trade secrets. You know, we are working with data, and a lot of people don't realize that data often qualify as a trade secret. So, you know, you can register your database or algorithms or compilations or whatever other information you have, financial information, sales information, as a trade secret. So that's the first thing that I would like to see. Another thing is, of course, copyrights. So software is difficult to patent. So, you know, you can patent software, but there are always easily circumventions possible because, you know, you change some lines in the code, you have a circumvention, the patent doesn't apply anymore.
You need a better patent attorney.
Sorry?
You need a better patent attorney.
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, copyrights are important, your graphic designs, your software. Also, just in terms of protection, obviously most of the companies don't want to have open source software. They want to have the software somewhere in a black box in the cloud. But if there is an infringement, you need your software to be copyrighted to be able to go to court, for instance. So there are many things that a company can do. And then obviously for devices, for IoT, tech-enabled medical devices, I would recommend to really have a patent strategy. That's really, really important. And applying for a patent, developing a patent, maintaining a patent takes many, many years. It's just not just having a patent application. I would rather see already a patent granted. There are the searches that will be performed on your patent. So, you know, from the very start of your company, you have to create IP value, which is an intangible fixed asset on your balance sheet, and that can only grow and boost the value of your company. So that is in general an overview of what you should do. And then as an investor, we do IP due diligence. We use IP due diligence checklists. We will ask all these questions about have you thought about your idea, give an overview. It starts, of course, with an overview, and then we go one by one to look in all the contracts. And there we often use lawyers on the one hand, and we would also use tech, let's say tech consultants to maybe have a real check on the software. They will watch the software code and give us a report, a tech due diligence report on if the software is really doing and providing the algorithms that they claim in their investor deck. So don't underestimate IP, and I hope my colleagues agree with that.
Mikhail? Mikhail may have frozen there.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you hear me?
That was excellent.
Yeah. So yeah, you know, starting my career in medical devices and shifting to the digital health, I think we've seen a tremendous change in the way we see IP. You know, IP historically in medical devices was currency. We would never do a deal without having a strong IP. And in the data-driven era, I think we give a different kind of coefficient to IP, both because a lot of those companies are willing, rightly so, to keep their knowledge, their know-how, without writing any patent, and through that protecting their asset even more. So we've seen a radical change when we do see companies, and we always try to encourage to even data-driven technologies to write or capture something. We are using always a third-party group that helps us assess it and do a very professional analysis.
Yeah,
I would just like to add
Oh,
just a very short comment here, because it was a very, David really made a great summary, but also how important can it be to have market data exclusivity when you have technologies that are monitoring and testing and following up patients who take everyday drugs, and you can eventually come up with digital biomarkers that you can justify in front of the governments that your drug is actually providing patients with a new indication or a new benefit. So IP is fine, trade secrets, but don't forget about the potential of market protection exclusivity in certain countries, which is an extension of your exclusivity. It's been widely used by the generics companies, but I think digital health can add a lot of data on this phase 4 type of study information.
Well, I mean, digital health, where software is involved, just because you could patent it doesn't mean you should. You need to look very carefully at whether trade secrets are better. And the other adage, it's all in the data. You've got to look after that data. You've got to own that data if you can. You've got to be able to own any insights it reveals. And it's data is absolutely everything. And protecting that form of IP is just as important, if not more so, than filing patents, in my view. Let's move on. This is now really is quite personal, because I'm going to ask each of you in turn, what would distinguish a great potential investment for you? Patrick.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, essentially, we are looking at so many aspects, obviously, when we're deep diving into cases we like. But if there are 3 aspects that we definitely would be looking for, I think firstly, for us, is this product and this team that is developing this product really solving a big unmet need, a big healthcare problem? I think that's got to be a big check in the box. The other aspect is obviously the team and the ambition. I mean, are the plans to build a small-scale local company, or are the plans which we're looking for as a venture investor really to grab the world? So I think ambition and plans, there are ambitious but also realistic. We would definitely pay a lot of attention to beyond product. And the third piece is really, which I think still we haven't really seen, which is, of all angles, is this company able to scale globally? And I think we're looking at all angles there. We're looking at scaling from a product perspective, commercially, and maybe also from a regulatory IP perspective. I mean, are there scalable potentials? Because those are really the companies we would love to back from the beginning, all along the journey.
Thank you. Cameron.
Yeah, I think just to add to the points Patrick made, maybe the kind of one thing I'll pull out, and it's a follow on the team point, is kind of looking at asking the question of the unfair advantage of this specific team in setting out to address the problem that they're looking to solve, or the solution which they're creating. Given how early we invest as a venture fund, which is very early in a company's journey, things will inevitably go wrong. It's more a case of when, not if. And so it kind of all comes back to the point around the team and kind of the unfair advantage, as we like to call it, of that specific team for this issue.
Thank you. David.
Okay, so I won't repeat what Patrick and Cameron has said, but what you guys said is absolutely true. Unmet need, team, scalability, very important. But what we see is that so many companies do the same stuff, especially, right now in health tech, let's say capturing data, processing the data, and output. It's input, process, output. It's like the old days of computing, right? And, a lot of health tech companies are trying to do this in a similar way, with less or more evidence, clinical evidence or whatsoever. What we'd like to see is that they do it in a differentiated or radically this other way. I don't want to use the buzzword disruptive, but like something that sets them out of the crowd, because there are so many teams that just do the same in many countries. And then one team does it in France and another team in Germany and another team in another country. And that makes it really difficult to, to say, I'm not convinced that you're going to make it to the rest of the world. So that's this really differentiating aspect that we're looking for.
Now we are running out of time here. Joseph, would you like to just quickly outline what you look for?
Yeah, and I cannot agree more on everything that has been said. I would just say I'm super sensitive. We are very sensitive to the clinical sensitivity of the team, the whole team, not the CEO. When I did my first digital investment in the US 5 years ago, it was an entrepreneur, techie. Well, he had some colleagues in the team that were, had some medical backgrounds. Now, the CEO has to have such a level of medical sensitivity to clinical value and knowledge and absolutely around clinical evidence that for us now it's a must, clearly.
Michal?
I'll do it quick. I think it's team, market, and most important is a business model. Use your first dollar not to develop an algorithm or technology. I would encourage everybody to reverse engineer the money trail that will pay be developed to become scalable. How you're going to make money out of it. And I think later on, if you figure that one out, there's enough people, smart people, from scientists to data scientists that could help you build it. Spend your time there first.
Right. Well, we've only got literally a minute or so left. So I'm gonna, this is a tough one because it's a soundbite. And the question for each of you, and please be quick, is what is the single most important thing that you can do as an investor to support a company post-investment? Patrick, go.
I mean, there are so many things, but I think we do this. We roll up our sleeves and we get very, very active with the teams that we invest in. So I think that is what we do from day one. We try and support you guys when you get on board with us. And there is a lot of team and HR aspects, strategy, financing, and so forth. But we try and be as much as a supporter of you guys as we can throughout the journey.
Perfect. Cameron?
Yeah, just to pick out one, I'd say, it's around hiring. Kind of typically after a company closes around, naturally they'll look to hire more heads and headcount will increase. And typically from experience, we've seen that, that can take up a lot of management's time. So to the extent that we can help to ensure that there is a process, it's effective, and the right people are getting hired, then we can save our founders and our companies 6 months potentially on a senior hire. So we've got a lot of in-house resources specifically to help our companies with that.
That's great. Joseph?
Be sure that the founders and the team focuses, eventually don't even sleep thinking about regulators and payers.
That was snappy. Thank you. Michal?
Well, I think what investors could really help with is open doors to the world. Connect those entrepreneurs and management to new source of ideas. We did it by design. We have strategic investors in the fund like Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, Abbott, Boston Scientific, payers, providers, tech companies, that we try to open the doors to those senior levels to get a grasp of what the market thinks. I think this feedback helps a lot.
Thank you. And last but not least, David.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I would like to be a trusted coach and friend for the managers or the CEO, the management, senior leadership of the company, who can call me day and night and just bring them value always.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank the panelists for participating today. I've utterly failed as the moderator because we have a stream of questions down the right-hand side of my screen, which I've utterly failed to ask. I'm not sure how Kieran will deal with that from LSX afterwards, but I hope that's, though, the reflection of the fact we've had a really good conversation. Everybody's contributed, and I'd just like to thank everybody for taking part and for all of those who've joined us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for moderating.
Take care. Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.